the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
from the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex information and really get to the heart of what matters.
Yeah, helping you make sense of it all.
And today we're diving into some, well, pretty striking developments from the United Kingdom. Things concerning legislation around abortion and public expression.
We've got one main source for this, an article from The Federalist. It was published just yesterday, June 18th, 2025.
Right.
The title is UK Prohibits Silent Prayer but is Poised to Permit Abortion Till Birth, and it's by Jordan Boyd.
Okay, The Federalist. So we know it's coming from a conservative viewpoint.
Exactly. And our job today is just to neutrally lay out what this specific article presents, the arguments, and the information it contains for you.
Right. So our mission is to explore these two kind of seemingly contradictory legal threads in the UK that the article highlights. What happened, why the source thinks it matters.
The different perspectives presented within that source.
And as we unpack it, you'll see how the article connects these dots to paint a very specific picture. So let's kick off with the first major point the article makes. This recent abortion amendment in the UK.
Yeah, described in the source as a really big deal. Apparently, the House of Commons voted overwhelmingly just this Tuesday, June 17th, to pass an amendment.
And this amendment would effectively legalize abortion right up until birth across England and Wales.
That's what the article states, yes. And it really makes a point about how this happened.
How so?
Well, citing Right to Life UK, the Federalist article says MPs basically hijacked a crime and policing bill.
Hijacked. So not the usual process.
Apparently not. They used this other bill as a vehicle to push the amendment through, and crucially, with only about 2 hours of debate.
Wow, 2 hours for something potentially changing abortion law. That's significantly.
Exactly. The source highlights that speed, suggesting it, bypassed the kind of deep scrutiny you might expect for such a major shift.
Okay, that does sound fast. So just to get the context right, what was the law before this? Under the old 1967 Abortion Act.
Right. So under the 67 Act, elective abortions were technically allowed up to 24 weeks.
Okay.
But there was this condition. You needed 2 doctors to agree that continuing the pregnancy would harm the woman's mental or physical health or that of her existing kids. The Federalist describes that condition as vague and sweeping.
Meaning it wasn't much of a hurdle in practice?
Well, the article points to the hundreds of thousands of abortions performed annually as evidence that, the requirement was pretty easily met.
Got it.
And beyond 24 weeks, the 67 Act also allowed abortions if the unborn baby was thought to have a high risk of, quote, physical or mental abnormalities or being seriously handicapped.
Okay, so that was the baseline. Now this new amendment that just passed the Commons, what exactly does it change, according to the source?
The big thing, if it gets through the House of Lords too, is that it would shield women from any criminal consequences for inducing an abortion.
At any stage.
At any stage, regardless of trimester. That's the key point the article emphasizes.
And what are the implications of that, as presented in the piece?
Well, the article cites SPUC. That's the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children.
Okay.
And SPUC apparently noted this means abortion could happen for literally any reason right through all 9 months. Even, they suggest, for sex selection.
Wow.
SPUC also raised another concern highlighted in the article, that this change could mean there'd be no legal way to prosecute an abusive partner, for example, who forces or causes an abortion, leading to the death of the unborn baby.
So the article frames this as a really dramatic expansion, removing almost all legal barriers or oversight related to the act of abortion itself for the woman.
That's definitely the interpretation presented, yes. A fundamental shift.
Okay, so how do the proponents justify this? What's their argument, as reported by the Federalist?
The source mentions the proposer, Labour MP Tony Antoniazzi, and her pitch apparently was focused on removing the threat of prosecution for women who have abortions, especially maybe vulnerable women using potentially unsafe methods like back alley procedures or getting abortion pills like mifepristone through the mail.
So it's framed as protecting women from the law, essentially.
That seems to be the core argument presented for the proponents, yes.
Yeah.
Removing that legal risk.
And the opposition, what were their specific concerns? according to the source.
The article quotes a couple of conservative MPs, Rebecca Smith and Julia Lopez.
And what did they say?
They voiced worries that this amendment could be, quote, weaponized
Weaponized how?
to basically lock in these expanded abortion permissions permanently and potentially even embolden abusers, tying into that earlier SBUC point.
Right.
There's a direct quote from Julia Lopez MP that the article highlights. The biggest change to abortion law in 50 years passes the Commons after a 2-hour debate. It is a profound change that leaves the unborn child and women themselves extraordinarily vulnerable.
Strong words.
Very. And the Federalist itself weighs in, calling the amendment an unpopular legal scourge and also a moral one. So the opposition is framed very strongly in the source.
Okay, so that's the abortion amendment side of the story, as told by the article. But then the piece makes this sharp turn, doesn't it? It juxtaposes this with how the UK handles silent prayer.
Exactly. This is the core contrast the article builds.
How does it connect these? And what is this silent prayer they're talking about? It
Well,
sounds specific.
It is specific. The Federalist claims the UK has, quote, repeatedly weaponized its anti-free speech laws to prosecute Christians who are praying silently near abortion facilities.
Silently. So not protesting out loud or holding signs necessarily.
Right. The article stresses this point. It's about silent internal prayer, maybe visibly quiet prayer, but not disruptive protest. It often relates to specific buffer zones set up around these clinics.
Buffer zones, okay. So laws restricting certain activities within a defined area around abortion centers.
Precisely. And the source argues these laws are being used to target even this quiet internal act of prayer within those zones.
And what happens to people found doing this? The article mentions prosecution.
Yeah, the consequences laid out are quite serious, according to the source. It says pro-lifers committing this, what the article terms a thought crime.
Thought crime. That's strong phrasing.
It is. But the article says they can be arrested, potentially face false imprisonment claims, be prosecuted in court, and fined.
For silent prayer within a buffer zone.
That's the claim, yes. The source uses this to highlight what it sees as a very strict crackdown on even quiet expressions of dissent in these specific areas.
And this is the contrast the article wants us to see.
Absolutely. The central argument is, look at this country. On one hand, it seems poised to allow abortion right up to birth, removing legal consequences for the act itself.
Right.
And on the other hand, it's actively prosecuting people for silently praying against abortion in a certain location.
That's the juxtaposition the Federalist is really driving home.
Exactly. And the framing is stark. The source explicitly says this isn't monumental progress, which is how it suggests some media might portray the abortion amendment.
Right.
But instead, it calls it a sign of severe decline.
So it's positioning these two things as evidence of a society losing its way, according to their perspective.
Pretty much. It contrasts its view with potential portrayals of the abortion law change as, historic or common sense reform. The Federalist sees it as a fundamental conflict of values playing out.
It seems the underlying point the source is making, then, is about which freedoms are being prioritized and which are being restricted.
I think that's fair to say. It raises questions about, how can a society champion one type of freedom, bodily autonomy, in this case while simultaneously, allegedly, clamping down so hard on another freedom of thought or expression, even silent prayer when it runs counter to the first.
It's implicitly asking if that's a coherent or positive direction from their standpoint.
Right. Can you claim progress when you're restricting what someone can even silently think or pray about in a public, albeit zoned space, especially on such a deeply moral issue? That's the tension the article presents.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together for you, the listener. We've looked at this source, the Federalist, which paints a picture of a really stark contrast in the UK right now.
Yeah, on one side, this potential major shift towards essentially decriminalizing abortion up to birth.
And on the other, the source claims strict legal action against even silent, prayerful opposition in specific zones near abortion clinics.
And what's really interesting is how the article uses this juxtaposition to explore that tension between different ideas of freedom and protection.
Right. You have the argument for bodily autonomy, for protecting women from prosecution.
Versus the arguments presented about the value of unborn life and also about freedom of conscience and expression, even in its quietest form. And where society draws the line, especially in public or semi-public spaces like buffer zones.
It definitely throws up some big questions, doesn't it? About how societies navigate these complex legal and moral landscapes when different rights or values seem to clash.
It really does. You start thinking about, well, how do different societies prioritize certain values, and how do those priorities then get written into law?
Yeah, it certainly pushes you to look beyond just the simple headlines like new law passed and consider the underlying philosophies and conflicts at play.
Exactly. It encourages that deeper look.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope breaking down this particular source has given you a clearer picture of the issues it raises and maybe spark some curiosity.
Yeah, lots to think about. Keep gigging, keep learning.
And we'll get you next time.